powerful reasons that you need to add Twitter into your social selling process. I think that the time has come where Twitter is not just a nice to have; it's a must have, right? So we both kind of wanted to tell our story and then give you 5 reasons so that you kind of understand how to get going. And then at the end of this, I'm going to give you 9 rules to follow to build a Twitter audience. And it's an ebook, little ebook that I put together, all the rules and how to actually get going and stay committed to building a targeted Twitter audience and getting your buyer engaged. So I want Gabe to start with kind of his story, where he was at, 2, 3 years ago before Twitter, and kind of now where he's at and the value that it's brought to him.
Awesome, man. No, this is exciting, and this is the first like video cast we do together.
Yeah, I think so, man. This is
Awesome.
more to come.
More to come. Awesome. So yeah, a little bit about my story. Started enter the SaaS space with InsideSales.com, and I helped develop Ken Crow's personal brand, InsideSales.com's personal brand, and one of those channels where we saw huge, tremendous value from both a branding, personal branding, and from both a brand, company brand perspective was Twitter. And a lot of people, some of you might listening right now might say, well, why Twitter, right? And it all comes down to where your buyer was. We found out back in the day, 2, 3 years ago, and it's even more relevant now, that our buyers were on Twitter. So if we developed a strong presence as InsideSales.com and as Ken Crow and any other of our executives, that we would then have increased credibility with our buyers. So after I noticed that, then I started developing my personal brand, and it took off after that. So from InsideSales.com, I went on to HireVue, and I've been at HireVue for almost 2 years now.
Yeah. So, and what's the impact on the bottom line? Like you wrote a blog post about this. I mean, social selling in general. I know you can't just attribute everything to Twitter, but what would you say from a revenue perspective? Not just a branding perspective. How has it helped you?
Oh, it's been huge because we've been able to track through marketing automation and any other technologies and tools, like what tweet has brought how many website clicks, what tweet has brought how many leads, how many conversions, etc. And there's all these vanity metrics that have played a level of importance to a degree. How many followers you have, how many retweets, how many replies, how many favorites, etc. But at the end of the day, like you mentioned, you want to be able to track the ROI. You want to be able to have lead attribution to say, okay, it takes this many tweets or this much engagement to get X amount of results. It's trackable. If you're not tracking it, then you're missing out. You're just leaving money on the table.
But I mean, really, if you think about it, Twitter, and we'll just dive into this right now. I'll talk about my story at the end, but Twitter is all about conversation, right? In sales, everything starts and ends with a conversation, plain and simple, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what do we spend most of our time pounding the phone in sales for, right? We're just trying to get somebody on the phone. LinkedIn, right? We've got a lot of people that just use LinkedIn. I'm not a huge fan of just using LinkedIn. I personally, don't think that's just social selling because LinkedIn's a stagnant platform, right? The data's stagnant, but Twitter is just one big conversation. So the number one most powerful reason I would say that you have to be on Twitter if you're in sales is conversation. I mean, we need more conversations. The more channels that you make yourself, visible and valuable on, and I'll dive into that more. Obviously, the more chance you're going to give to get into conversation, leading with value with your buyer, and get valuable and visible to them, so that you give yourself a shot at getting the deal, right?
Absolutely. It's like saying, if you're only going to be on LinkedIn, it's literally like saying I'm only going to email and I'm not going to use the phone.
Yeah.
I'm only going to use the phone and not use email. Literally, they both complement each other. They go hand in hand. And I'm not against traditional prospecting at all. You should actually integrate and embed phone, email, social, in this case in B2B, if your buyer's there, Twitter and LinkedIn, and any other channel that you find relevant in your industry.
Yeah, and I think in today's sales world, right? We're very selfish in sales, right? We're always asking for something.
Yep.
And if you think about the phone and email traditionally, which I think actually social selling, Twitter, LinkedIn, and kind of this whole process makes you actually be on the phone more, right?
Yeah.
And it actually makes your emails a lot more relevant, which, hopefully if you're doing it right, you're actually emailing people more, right?
Yeah.
And you're actually having better conversations, more valuable conversations with your buyer instead of begging them. And I think you agree with me if you I guess I would love to hear your feedback, but like, I look at social selling as value touches, right? Everything that we do in sales is ask, 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 ask. How do we fill those asking gaps? Because we do have to sell at one point, right? Like nobody ever sold a product without getting on the phone and selling or pushing a contract through email and just kind of staying engaged with your buyer. But if you think about Twitter, the powerful thing about Twitter is, let's say you've got a 2-week gap with a decision maker, you can actually stay in conversation and leading with value with them with Twitter. And I think that's a powerful thing because you can keep the conversation going, you can keep it alive, you can keep building the relationship, and you're not just pigeonholed into Twitter, or I mean, a phone. You're not just pigeonholed into email.
Right. No, you're really good at this, Jack. What I've noticed is that, like you said, many sales reps, whether they set an appointment or whether they contact the person and they say, hey, get back to me in a month or X amount of period of time, what you do during that period of time, whether it's when you schedule the appointment or whatever reason might be, is so important because think of it, your competition might be hitting them up too.
Well, let's roll into this. So the number two most powerful reason is
right. So the competitive advantage.
Yeah.
So using Twitter as a sales rep, it's going to be a huge competitive advantage in the B2B sales space, right? In SaaS space, I mean, it's definitely been a huge advantage in my personal experience, professional. And you have to find out what are you going to do on a day-to-day basis to help you stand out from the crowd. I mean, look at all the data of how many, if not hundreds of thousands of inside sales reps there are. I mean, inside sales reps are growing faster than outside sales reps right now. And InsideSales.com has a lot of cool data on that. But not just that, how many other people, right, are hitting your potential buyers? And being on Twitter, if your buyer's on Twitter, then you're definitely going to stand out because, number one, you can study what your buyer likes, what articles are they sharing, where do they like to consume articles, okay? Who do they engage with the most? What hashtags do they use the most?
What's their favorite basketball, or what's their favorite sport, right? Where do they like to eat? One of the best stories I've ever heard was a sales rep closed a big NBA team because the director of marketing tweeted out one of his favorite restaurants to eat, and the sales rep ordered the food, took a screenshot of the receipt, and tweeted the receipt to the director of marketing, and the food showed up, and he closed a $60K deal in 1 week when the average sales cycle was 2 months, right?
No, that's not. I think that's an awesome story. It's definitely there's value there. Not just that, but then a lot of you may think, well, Gabe or Jack, my buyer's not on social. Well, if you are following CEB and according to their buyer research data, then you should be targeting 6 people or 6 buyers or prospectives, right, per account. I guarantee you for sure 3 or 4 out of those 6 are going to be on Twitter, whether they're passively engaged or actively engaged. Okay, there's so much social data you can gather on Twitter, and you can use that for your advantage as a competitive advantage. Okay, to penetrate that account, to learn, to listen, and then attack. Right?
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is building the sale before it happens, right? Like starting the conversation before the buyer even knows they're going to buy. And with the sales cycles lengthening, right, and the noise getting stronger, and then you've got I can't tell you how many emails you get spammed per day, right? You get cold called or whatever traditional channel. How can you stand out? Like you said, get the competitive advantage, show the buyer early that you actually care about the buyer, right? And we'll go into that here in a minute. But let's go to number 3. Value and visibility, right?
It's huge. That's very important as well.
So, I'm not going to go into the 68% or whatever buyers are, already made their decision. I honestly, I hate hearing those stats anymore because we all get it, right? Like common sense tells us with 300 million active users on Twitter today that a few of your buyers are on Twitter, right? And the funny thing is, what a lot of people don't realize with Twitter is that not everybody's actively tweeting, right? But how many of your buyers could be actively listening, reading content, consuming content? So how can you get valuable and visible to your buyer, right? And sometimes not even know that they're even there.
So you said two strong words, right? Value and visibility. Like explain more about that then.
So when I say value, what I mean is becoming an advocate for your buyer, right?
Okay.
And whether that's sharing your network by sharing their content, right? Everybody in business today, we're all fighting for space. We're all fighting for getting our I'm trying to think of, so visibility, right? We're all fighting for visibility. So if you take value, and that's actually taking your buyer's content or your buyer's, you know, if they're complaining about their competitor, right? Taking their complaint, and you're actually leading with value, which is I'm not going to ask you for your time. I'm not going to ask you for your business. I'm actually going to take the time to get to know my buyer, to help be an advocate for them, to share their message, to help even generate them business. I can't tell you how many times I've actually seen somebody asking for, on Twitter, complaining about a tool that they're using or a technology or a process that they want to fix. And I'm like, oh, bingo, like I know so and so sells a product like that, and I know that they might be able to fix their problem. And then I introduce the two just through conversation on Twitter. I mean, like a warm lead on Twitter, right? Because really, if you think about it, that's all it is. It's just one big networking event that goes on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And if you can get involved and get into the conversation, lead with value, it will make a tremendous impact on your buyer from an emotional standpoint. And when that time comes where your buyer is ready, you will have influenced their, not necessarily their decision, right? Because you still have to be able to sell. I mean, it's not going to sell anything for you, but you'll at least influence them your way to give you a shot at the deal, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that, number 4 is buyer focus. I want you to, the fourth most powerful thing for Twitter is being buyer focused. Kind of dive into that.
Yeah. So with being buyer focused has been really, really important in the sales process from my perspective. And I currently coach 66 sales reps at HireVue, B2B sales reps. Those are field reps, inside sales reps, ADM, SDRs, BDRs, and closers. And knowing that your buyers on Twitter, right? You're actually, and if you do your homework, you're actually doing yourself a favor and you're doing them a favor. Why? Because you're learning how they like to be approached.
Yep.
And this is whether you're into Twitter or not. This is just sales 101. It's what channel, what preferred method of communication does your buyer like to be on? Okay, if it's Twitter, then you better dang be on Twitter. If it's LinkedIn, then be on LinkedIn. If it's phone and email, I guarantee you that your buyer most likely does not like to be cold called. Maybe that has worked maybe a few times in their lifetime. And email is very hard to stand out. But if your buyer, right, is on Twitter or LinkedIn, then you better be tracking and listening to everything they're saying. Okay, learn as much as you can. Learn who they're talking to, their past, what school did they go to, what organizations do they have, which skills do they have, etc. Okay, and then learn as much as you can to be buyer focused in order to increase your chance of winning and penetrating that account. And
messaging, right? So messaging, huge. Like, the number one disconnect in sales today is messaging. In sales, we go in with what we think, the buyer wants, right? But the cool thing about Twitter, and one of the things that I've had a lot of success with, is that I now don't have to guess, what's going to get my buyer to actually engage with me, right? Because I can read their Twitter feed. I can see what's important to them. I can see, like I said, the little social pieces, like personalization is huge. And not only that, but what I've noticed is that if I've followed somebody for a while on Twitter and I've paid attention to them, right? And I've kind of watched, what's relevant to them, what they're talking about. It's funny, when I get on that sales call, it's almost sometimes like I know the buyer already, right? Like, it's like I don't have to have the awkward conversation where the SDR sent the demo. I go into the company, know limited research about them. I actually get to know the person on an individual level.
Do it in a genuine way.
Yes.
And not just that, but I honestly hate it when sales reps hit me up right now, like this week, every day, literally, saying, Gabe, I want to learn more about your marketing efforts for 2016. Ugh. It's like, I'm tweeting so much, I am engaging so much and leaving so many social breadcrumbs that the sales reps should already, know what's important to me and what my pain points are.
Yeah.
And if they're not, then I literally call them out and be like, dude, did you even do some research on me? Or was this one big email blast with a generic template? I mean, I have so much information out there. My life is pretty much publicly open on social media.
Yeah.
That they can.
I mean, the other day you tweeted a picture of you and your wife and your kid at the train station.
Right. Yeah. So.
And I mean, and they missed the train. Like, I could tell you right now that probably one of the most, easiest ways that the salesperson could have got you engaged was to say, hey, send you a picture of a trade, right? Like with
Oh,
a sad
totally.
kid. I mean, like
Yeah.
I'm just giving you examples, but like sales, we got to get creative, right? We've got to get personal. We've got to show the buyer that we're not just trying to sell them a product, because if we can do that in sales, and using social is a big piece of that, right? Because the phone doesn't give you visibility into these people's lives, right? The phone, email doesn't give you visibility into what kind of content that's important to them or what's going on in their industry.
It's effective but limited, I would say.
Yeah. So if you can use them in tandem, right? If you can take their words, right, which we're taught to do that in sales already, right? Discovery in the call and then write down and ask them the right questions. But you could actually do a lot of pre-discovery by using Twitter to understand your buyer on a whole new level, and that's really what you're talking about, just being straight buyer focused.
No, and understand the company. If none of your buyers, let's say worst case scenario, let's say your buyers are not active on Twitter, then I guarantee you they have a social media person that tweets a lot, okay? And that person, whether it's male or female, are going to be tweeting their achievements, their awards,
Yes.
their pains, their growing pains, who they hired, etc. They're giving so many social clues out there. You can also embed those. So not just the buyer, but look at the company's Twitter handles or just company.
So let's dive into that. So the fifth and final one, and I think that this is really, really powerful, and I don't think that enough people talk about this. So if you think about sales, and kind of what's happening in that the shift in the digital age is like content is king, right? Like they say. I always say that revenue's king, right? Because if the queen doesn't have money, right, she can't be the queen. So, but that's a little joke. I'll talk about it another day. But if you think about content, one of the things that's the hardest right now is that you've got a lot of millennials in sales. And what millennials are trying to do is they're trying to do the spray and pray method, right?
Right.
Phone, email. And they're trying to tell the Gen Xers or the older generation that they should buy something, right?
They just laugh at them.
Yeah, they laugh at them. Like, what do you know about my business,
I've
right?
been in sales for business like 30 years more than you have. Why should I listen to you?
It's like, I've built 2 or 3 businesses up to millions of dollars, and you're going to get on a phone and tell me that I have this gap, right? Like, I've always kind of laughed at that, even though I've done it my whole career, right? The young guy or the young gal trying to tell, the proven business person that they have gaps, and this young millennials that's been with the company for a year is going to fix them, right?
Or less.
Yeah. So what I found, and really where I've had a lot of success with Twitter, is leveraging content for a variety of reasons. But one of the main things is to know my industry better than everybody else. And when I say that, I don't mean that I know the past industry better than anybody else. But when I get on the phone, I am at a disadvantage a lot of times with my age. But if I can use content, which I love Twitter for this reason, because Twitter gives you the best content. People, when new blogs come out, whether it's a main media channel or it's a blogger or whatever it is, if you get to know your industry content better than everybody else, you can now not just talk about your product. You can now talk about your industry. What's going to happen? What's forecasted to happen in 10 years or 20 years? Because I can tell you that business owners don't have time to consume massive amount of content and keep up with what's gonna happen or what's happening. A lot of times they're so in the weeds trying to do operational things or just help their business grow or help keep their employees there, whatever that may be, that they don't get that new content or the new industry. Give me my word.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, like, sorry, I lost my train of thought.
So I'm trying to. So the future of the industry, right? So if you get on the phone with a buyer and you know the industry so well by leveraging that content, right?
Right.
Being ahead of the times.
You actually be doing them a favor. Right?
You become the expert.
And you're not just adding value. You're educating them. You're like I said, you're adding value. You become the credible source for X, Y, Z. I think that's what you're trying to say, right?
Exactly what I was trying to say. And there's many ways, but content, I think, really at the core, you've got to be on the channels where the content of your industry that nobody else is reading, it lives, right? And Twitter, a lot of times, a lot of content lives on Twitter that you don't see on LinkedIn, or you don't see it on any of the other social channels, or even on some blogs, right? Like, there's a lot of good bloggers, industry bloggers, that share mainly all their content is either on Facebook or Twitter, and a lot of times Twitter, right? I find amazing stuff there.
and find relevant content, right? That it's gonna add value. It's gonna educate the buyer and educate yourself as well. Not just that, but then also not using third-party content. Sometimes even creating your own content. Let's talk.
Yes.
About, let's wrap up with that. How about that? Maybe or
Well, then we'll,
third-party content, curated content versus your own content.
and this will kind of lead into my story, right? My Twitter story. So I could tell you that on October 9th, 2015,
Yeah,
I
you know the
started.
date?
Yeah, I know the date. October 9th, 2015, I had 9 followers, and I had been writing a lot of content on LinkedIn, or had started writing content. Nobody knew who I was from an influential or industry thought leader standpoint, right? And I don't like that word either, but I'm going to use it. So when I started writing content, I would share it on LinkedIn or I'd share it on Google Plus or whatever. And I never thought that there was value in actually social selling or in the sales process with Twitter. So I always just kind of flew it off as like just Bieber fans, Kardashian fans, Kanye's rants. But what I found after getting into Twitter, I've started to build like true thought leadership, build an audience, right? And what was happening was I was writing content and people liked my content and they were actually taking my content and sharing it to my buyer. And I couldn't believe this. I'm like, in sales, we always work this one-to-one relationship, right? It's like, I'm going to call him, I'm going to call her, I'm going to email him, I'm going to email her. I mean, think how much, work has to go into that and how limited you are at connecting to buyers, right?
Yeah.
But what I realized is Twitter was amazing because I could put my content there, not only get into conversations, right? Keep conversations going, but I could actually have somebody else take my content, share it to the buyer, and actually create a conversation with another buyer through advocacy, which was the best thing in the world. I mean, there's nothing better than somebody that engages with you that's a potential buyer because they read something that you gave of value, which is content. And I'm not even saying you have to write your own content, right? I would say that if you should put the time into it, but you don't have to. Actually, just sharing really good, up-to-date, relevant content about your industry can have the same exact impact, right? Because you tweet something out, even if you didn't write it, they share it to your buyer starts a conversation, and now you're kind of in that the conversation value process to get that conversation offline, right?
I mean, and that's a whole nother video blog or blog. Like, should sales reps write content or not?
Yeah,
I'm a huge believer they are, but let's talk about that. Man, I witnessed your whole social selling story, and it's crazy to see how much content Jack has put out, how many, his audience has grown over the past 2 years. And I remember meeting you like 2 years ago in December, and I'm like, who's this Jack guy who keeps tweeting at me, And then anyway, so it's crazy and it's real. Like, if you're not on Twitter, like we highly urge you to do so. I mean, find out, number one, is your buyer on there? Are your buyers on Twitter? Okay, are there social breadcrumbs or digital footprints from your buyers or your company that you can use that data, right, to augment and penetrate that account? And my last words of advice is, if you are, then you should be all over freaking Twitter. Own it and pwn it, and don't stop, okay, till you see results.
Cool. And then, I'll leave you with this. So at the end of this ebook, you're actually going to see, at the end of this blog, you're actually going to see an ebook. And it's the 9 rules that I followed to build my Twitter following. And I actually went from October 9th, I had 9 followers, and a year from that date, I had over 20K engaged, I'm not going to say fully targeted, but a pretty targeted audience of people that were potential buyers or could potentially introduce me to buyers and share my message. And it's been so powerful. I mean, I went from you've seen me go from one, brand, as a top sales rep over at Acton Software, and now I'm, a VP for a top global agency, helping, in a variety of ways, but social selling, training, and showing sales reps how to take social and turn it to dollars. Because I don't care what anybody says, you're not social selling unless dollars are turning up.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
amen, dude. If you're not seeing the ROI, the lead attribution, and the money, if you're not moving deals forward, right, then you're just building relationships and you're staying in the friend zone. What happens in the friend zone?
Yeah, nothing happens in the friend zone.
Yeah, baby. Woo!
Okay, so we'll end it now. Thanks for taking time with us. Download that ebook. Get active on Twitter. Put your heart and soul in, and just remember, everything is about conversation. The more conversations that you have in your conversation pipeline with the right people, you do the right things, move them offline, sell. Don't forget you gotta sell. So,
Close them.
close them. All right, baby.